everyone. Her story has partnered with WhatsApp for See Us, Hear Us, a powerful movement that champions for women's visibility and voices by providing them tools to break through whatever stands in their way of success and growth. So let us introduce our panelists. We have with us Jayanti Vaidyanathan, Senior Director and Head, Human Resources, PayPal India. In her last 10 years with PayPal, Jayanti has set up the India team and helped shape and drive this talent strategy while being a key force that enabled the organization's transformation and vision aimed at enhancing employment and business value proposition. Welcome, Jayanti. Next, we have with us Madhurima Agarwal. She's the Director, Engineering Programs and Leader, NetApp Accelerator. Leading GIC strategy and operations, she's a techno-functional leader with a strong bias towards innovation. Welcome, Madhurima. And we have with us Tina Vinod, Global Head, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, ThoughtWorks. A feminist at heart, the strong belief that an inclusive organizational structure brings about the best in teams and individuals, Tina drives the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Charter at ThoughtWorks and is part of the Global Social Change Group. Welcome to the roundtable, you wonderful women. So let's go straight into the topic. So diversity and inclusion has become a point of discussion, the focal point of discussion over the years. How far do you think India has come in ensuring that this actually works and this is a mandate in all organizations? Can we start with Tina, please?
It's interesting, right? Diverse country, diverse workplaces, formal and informal sector, and then there is, of course, the corporates and the multinationals, right? Hugely influenced by the West in terms of their DEI charter. So I would say when it comes to the corporates, when it comes to the formal sector, there is awareness. At least from a gender perspective, right? From a women in the workplace perspective, there is awareness. Of course, there are different ways in which you look at awareness, right? There is, of course, there is the way you look at diversity in the workplace. And I'm not talking equity and inclusion here. I'm just saying diversity in the workplace is probably about goals and targets rather than a more holistic approach. Very, very few organizations look at it as a holistic approach. And of course, there's the benevolent sexism, right? Okay, we're doing this because women matter and we need to protect our women then. And I think that is the narrative we need to change today. And that is the reason why we need to have more role models in the workplace. We need more women step up and take on leadership roles. I mean, look at the percentage of women entering the workforce today, very, very high. How many of them stick to the workplace after 15 years or even after 10 years in the workplace, right? And what is the percentage of women at the leadership level? Very, very low, right? And we can't even talk about intersections. We can't talk about other areas of focus as well. But just looking at, a little more than 50% of the world's population underrepresented, hugely face unconscious bias and conscious bias in the workplace. And there's so much more to be done.
Jayanti, in your long career, what has been your experience? Has it changed for the better, or is there still a lot to be done when it comes to diversity and inclusion at the workplace?
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me. I totally agree with Tina Rekha. I think we've seen a lot of momentum and, it's kind of the trajectory has changed over the last few years. I think initially the thought was more around how to get an equal perspective or a voice from women in the workplace, in the boardroom. Now it's good to see that it's mature to understand that diversity is not just about embracing our uniqueness or having a voice at the table, but it's more about inclusion, right? Real inclusion where it's not just about women, but inclusion of disabled members of LGBTQA plus community. And like she said, for a country as diverse as India, we must aspire to build and recognize regional and socio-economic diversity too, right? I feel corporates are focused a lot more on gender and some of the other elements than looking at the socio-economic sense of diversity, we have a huge opportunity to be a part of. I'm sure as an equal opportunity employer, most of us would have automatically hired people that represents all subsets of diversity. I mean, India is a land of diversity. So I think diversity naturally happens, but our effort has increased around how do we make them feel at home? How do we provide safe spaces at workplace? How do we enable them to bring their true selves at work? And this is where I think the journey has begun. I think the journey has begun, and we, as leaders, DNA ambassadors, can make a huge difference. And I would say different entities, different organizations are at different stages of maturity in this journey, and we need to really help move this journey in its truest essence. For example, at PayPal, how do we build a product which intends to serve the underserved if we don't have the voice that adequately represents or builds it, right? So how do we reiterate the business imperative from a diversity standpoint is key to us.
Madhurima, you also work with a large number of women, right? So what do you think has changed, or has diversity and inclusion only come to mean, okay, you have you're increasing the percentage of women in a particular organization, or has it moved beyond that?
I think it's moved beyond that, and that's encouraging, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. And thanks to, I think, the active dialogue that started around this topic, people have recognized, in some pockets, yes, it is still, as Tina said, about a goal, about a number, ensuring that we don't get left behind in stating that we've got so many women in our workforce. But somewhere, and at least I see that at NetApp, right? If you see the leadership team here, it's it's nothing to do with the number of women there, but you see the power that women have is equal to the voice, that we have is equal to any other. So as part of that, I don't feel whether I'm a woman or a man. I mean, that doesn't even come to mind. It's just that we are a part of a great team, and we are all getting to contribute in a manner that we want to. And I think that has changed recently in a lot of places, from what I hear from my other colleagues, from friends who work at different places. So there is more acceptance, and of course there is a lot of visible push that is happening, but I think that's because of the recognition that people are now having, that we need to have women to bring in that diversity, and not just because it's good to have diversity, but it is a need to have, given the business sense it makes.
Biases are both, right? As both of you rightly pointed out, conscious as well as unconscious biases. So when we say unconscious biases, are we actually playing down these biases, or have these unconscious biases changed over the years? What we thought of unconscious biases a few years, a decade back, has it changed to include more biases as more women enter the workforce? What do you think, Jayanti?
So I think unconscious biases definitely continue to exist in some way or form. That's why we are moving, companies like us are moving from unconscious bias to conscious inclusion, right? How do you tune your mind to, consciously think about inclusion versus just eliminating unconscious biases? I was reading somewhere that, it's very physiological, right? How we process some of these unconscious biases. Apparently our brains unconsciously processes over 11 million pieces of information per second. Now compare that to the 40 pieces per second that it processes consciously. So as human beings, we are ingrained in our system to process a lot of unconscious information. So I think it's absolutely, due to our, innate inability to process everything at all times, we react very instinctively based on, the unconscious information that we've processed. So there are various forms of unconscious bias that creep both into our personal and professional lives. We talk about affinity, attribution, beauty, gender, the halo effect, horn effect, all that we've heard. So I think it's important for organizations to start recognizing what the unconscious biases are and moving to, very conscious inclusion, right? So for example, we did an exercise called a Break Free campaign a few years ago, and kind of opened a lot of our senses to some of the unconscious biases. So we asked people to actually write down, statements of unconscious bias in a format that said, I am, but I'm not kind of a format. So there were, I'm conservative in my attire, but I'm not conservative in my product roadmap or how I design. I'm a manager at work, but not a bossy female, for example, right? Or I wear a burqa, but I'm not less fun loving than anybody else. So I think those kind of dialoguing that we spoke about and being very, very open in having some of those conversations really helps in moving from an unconscious bias to a conscious inclusion kind of a frame.
Tina, as Jayanti pointed out, creating a culture of openness is very important. Also, how important is it for organizations to encourage their employees to speak out against unconscious biases? Because some people believe that what may be unconscious biases for one may not be for the other. So, how does this play, in an organization?
One of the things that we have done first is the fact that we all have our biases. I have it, all of us do. And it's not going to go away. And in fact, unconscious biases help us a lot in decision making, both conscious and unconscious biases, right? And that is who we are as humans. But at the same time, I think one of the things that we have, being a global organization in close to 14, 15 countries across 44 offices, sometimes locations, it's a big challenge. When you're working with a diverse set of clients, and you really need to consciously examine your biases that you carry. And so we have built an unconscious bias workshop that has been customized and, to the needs of ThoughtWorks. So this is, it used to be a 4-hour workshop. And we used to have, we used to do this over with a break, meeting face to face. And it used to be a really fun and engaging session with lots of storytelling. The stories were stories from ThoughtWorks. What leaders faced, what some women faced, what men faced, what people from the LGBTQ plus community faced. But the reality is we need more than that. Today, we do these sessions virtually, but it's beyond men and women and biases. We bias jobs, we bias individuals, we bias communities. And I think there's so much of reading and education that we need to do. So we do something called the Circle of Trust in ThoughtWorks, and we encourage ThoughtWorkers to come and share their lived experience and stories. And so it would mean someone like me sharing my story as probably going through a mental health, challenge, or another ThoughtWorker sharing their story as being part of the LGBTQ plus community. These are honest, lived experiences that they share. And it really has the power to create change and to really build empathy and understand some of our biases.
Build empathy and understanding. Let's take off on that, Madhurima. Do you think women are being open in voicing their concerns about unconscious biases in an organization? Or are they still scared?
That's a difficult question, Rekha, and why a general answer would not apply, because I think it is very, very specific to an individual in a manner,
Okay.
right? See, it's if we say that we know that women are not speaking up, against unconscious bias, in a way that itself is assuming something. You're assuming that they felt that unconscious bias, right? So before I share my answer on this, I look at bias in a very different manner, right? I was reading this book, Psychology of Money, by Michael Mortenhausen, and what he talks about is that how we think is shaped on what we have gone through our life, right? Where we were born, when we were born, and all those things. So, what might feel like bias to one person might not feel like bias to another. So, how do we generalize that, women are not speaking against? But having said that, I do think that as women, uh, we tend to avoid conflict. And whenever you're speaking up against something, it is kind of creating conflict. Again, I know I'm generalizing here, but just having heard from research, I think the first step is for women also to recognize that they are being biased against. right? Sometimes, and I say this on a lighter note, sometimes you talk to the men, the colleagues around you, and they'll say, I think now there's too much bias towards women. So it's difficult for me to get a promotion because it will go to a woman. And that's wrong. That's wrong. But that's a fact that people are feeling that somewhere probably, which is why even in jest, such statements are coming out. So yeah, I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I don't think we can say that for sure whether women are speaking up or not. But what is being done is that an opportunity is being created or an environment is being created where they can feel safer to speak up than what was before.
Safer to speak up. But the pandemic, has been a tough time for everyone, right? So, and you're no longer working in an office. You no longer have access to one-on-one meetings like physical meetings. Everything is turned virtual, and we've all moved online. So, has the pandemic actually brought any form of unconscious biases to the forefront, Tina? Is it becoming more difficult for women because everything is online these days?
Yes and no. I'll tell you why it is yes and why it is no. I think a lot of times, there is this conception, there is this misconception that women are the primary caregivers,
Mm.
and hence, you can't give them this important project. You can't assign them to this, right? Or they're working from home, so their responsibilities have increased, and they're also taking care of their kids' education because everything is online now. And so, this important, huge revenue opportunity project can't go to them. We should find a man to do this. uh, that is bias, right? That is truly bias. And so, have you asked? So, when we actually ran an internal survey called the COVID Pulse Check Survey, a thought worker wellness and COVID Pulse Check Survey internally. We ran this sometime in July last year, peak pandemic time. We just wanted to know how we can support thought workers better. We wanted to understand how are they feeling, how are they coping during these times. And when we actually looked at the data, it was a 100% anonymous survey. But when we looked at the data as men versus women, right, and other underrepresented gender minorities, there wasn't too much, difference in the data when it came to work-life balance, when it came to responsibilities at home. So I think we're moving ahead. Times are changing, but our biases aren't. We still hold those biases, and it's very important to consciously examine our biases often. So that is about the challenges. But I think the positive side of it is many things. I think we're onboarding new employees, and sometimes we build our own biases based on so many things, right? When we see them, when we talk to them face to face, and those are all masked in your virtual world, and it just sometimes levels the playing field, not always, but sometimes levels the playing field. So I would say yes and no when it comes to unconscious bias, but there are lots of other things like the familiarity bias, right? You want to work with people you're familiar with, and there are so many new people joining your team, your organization, but you're not familiar with them. And the pandemic situation of working remotely doesn't give you the opportunity to get a lot familiar than you want to, and hence I think that there are challenges with it. Personally, for me, I see more challenges, but that's my personal opinion. I just want to get back to my office. I just want to get back to that energy and the vibrancy that's there in our workplaces, but each one's experiences are different.
Sure. Madhurima, a lot of women we spoke to in the course of the many stories we have done during the pandemic, especially, they say they're worried about how their productivity is measured because everything is online these days. So they say that these kind of biases may work against them, because they are not physically present in the office. They're worried, and they tend to work more so as to, so as to so that it reflects in more productivity. So, what do you say about that? Are these fears real?
I think they are real as they are perceived, by the women, right? Because the first step is now they are aware, right? Because of this dialogue, they're aware of the kind of biases people hold against them, right? They know that if I don't attend a meeting near lunchtime, even if it's for a different reason, they will assume it's because I'm making lunch, whether that's true or not. I mean, that's what the unconscious bias part comes in. And thus we tend to compensate for it by working more, by taking on stuff which probably could have been easily managed otherwise if we were present in front. And I think Tina put it very well when she said there are various biases, the familiarity bias, other things that come into play. So is it real? We really don't have enough data to see the outcome of this. We've been, yeah, 1 year, but still, I mean, the appraisals are going to happen now. But I think in a way, the fact that we are conscious of this and people are talking about this will help the cause of overcoming this unconscious bias.
Yeah, if I can add a little bit
Yes.
to that, Rika, I think the last 1 year has actually challenged us to look at things very differently, right? So the need to look at versatile, work policies and tools, better collaborative systems, reward systems. It's almost become the new normal, right? We're starting to think about how do we manage a hybrid workforce, the new normal. You would end up with an environment where part of your company is working from home, part at work, part remote, and so on and so forth. And then how does inclusion and biases, play to all this in the new environment becomes critical. So I think fundamentally it's about coaching our leaders and our managers to be able to, kind of work through the new normal, eliminate or recognize any unconscious biases that might exist. For example, a little contrary to what Tina said, we did see we have something called crisis leave. We do wellness surveys as well every week, and when we saw crisis leave, it's leave you could just take without citing a reason if you want to take off because you need to take care of the family or somebody's down with COVID or whatever, right? And we actually saw women take more of crisis leave than men do, you know. So it kind of goes to say that women continue to be in some way the primary caregiver. While we've evolved in a lot of ways, it's still a lot of familial responsibility falls on the women. So it's also important to look at policies. For example, we did away with a performance rating system this year, in considering that each of our people are working with very different nuances this year and have their own individual, kind of needs. So we removed the performance rating system, for example, right? So I think it's important for organizations, a fantastic time to learn and evolve and be able to think through, apply the lens of, inclusion and your work systems and processes and tools in the new normal.
Tina, what more can be done by companies to assuage these fears, right? Of these unconscious biases, which women feel cannot be addressed because they're not physically present in an office.
I think organizational culture plays a big role here, creating a safe space for people to talk. And how connected are you, irrespective of whether you are virtual or you are in office, and or whether it's a blended model becomes important. Um, Having understanding the fact that our individual experiences in our lives are unique, and sometimes you may need to give customized support beyond just a policy is also important. And so creating a culture of belonging is critical. And how do you do that, right? um, of course there are policies, there are a lot of support systems that are there that organizations need to and should offer. But in addition to that, what are your leaders saying? What are you saying in your town halls? How are you encouraging people to speak up? What is your DEI team or your people team doing? And how are they connecting and creating smaller groups, right? What, like I was just saying, some time back, doing an office wide conversation versus doing it for a project is very different, right? It's a smaller group, it's a closer group. One of the things that we recently introduced is something called the inclusive team social contract. And in the purview of the remote work, right, and distributed work that we are doing, working from anywhere, we're asking teams to revisit their best practices, whether it is when they have schedules and meetings, whether they're creating a culture of belonging and trust. whether it is about, their client interactions, or whether other practices, right? Like how are they catching up informally as a team and connecting informally as a team. And so this social contract is captured and then revisited time to time. And this is something that we're encouraging teams to do as well.
So, which brings us to technology. So, how can technology help in combating these biases? So, with a lot of our work interactions moving online because of work from home or remote working, do private spaces like WhatsApp lend themselves for people to authentically share their thoughts about these issues? You know, a lot of communication happens through WhatsApp groups, through lists and other allied services. So I'm putting the question to the three of you. Probably we can start with Jayanti.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, Rekha. I mean, we talk about Internet of Things. We've, as organizations, we've already started leveraging some of these tools, but it all, I think, we're put to its best use, especially during the last 1 year. In fact, so much so that we did a Kids at Work virtually with around 3,000 of our employee children and parents kind of joining us virtually, which we never imagined was possible earlier. So firstly, I think, one Internet of Things kind of technology helps us to connect directly with employees and their families, right? So we've done our annual day, which is a big bash event at PayPal, where we included the family members as well. So I think it's an opportunity to convert this time into a real opportunity and a USP. There are several solutions as well. If you look at employee health and safety, how do you ensure better worker productivity? How do you look at smart desks that will warn employees if they're practicing poor ergonomics? How do you you've all spoken about how to eliminate biases from a hiring standpoint by leveraging some of the smart tools that are available. So I think there are several opportunities and several, newer kind of chatbot, mood apps kind of models coming to play that, we have a huge opportunity.
Do you use
Sure.
WhatsApp as part of your work routine?
Very informally. It's still, to be honest, it's still not gained its way to be a very formal mechanism. There are formal opportunities like Slack, Teams, and so on, but the most used informal, conversation mechanism is WhatsApp, and there's a lot that we gain through that mechanism. So absolutely.
Thank you. What about you, Madhurima?
I think, Jayanti has put it beautifully. Tech can be used in all ways, and it's due to tech that we've been able to tide over this pandemic without productivity suffering and all. And I think, the newer tools, tech-based ones, they also, especially in the mental health space, I think they are doing some very good work, which is very important today when everybody is going through this stress of working from home and additional things that happen because of that. So a lot of apps, a lot of assistants, virtual assistants that have come up, which now measure that. And in some way, I think they are also, it's still early days, but I think they will give a good signal to the employers as well as to how their workforce is feeling, what can be done to support them, help them, which in turn is going to increase productivity and be good for the company. To your specific question about WhatsApp, personally, I think I am a big user of WhatsApp, especially with my team, because they know that they will drop me an email. But if there is anything that they need to close very quickly, we can either get on a call. And if it's during hours when, a call will probably disturb other people at home, we can just do it on WhatsApp. That is there. Having said that, I think in the corporate place, emails have their own special place, and anything which is of very high importance or confidential in nature will have always happen over the emails. But WhatsApp is good. I sometimes just drop an email, WhatsApp message to my colleagues and ask, hey, how's it going? So to keep me connected to them when I don't have a specific topic to discuss or kind of create those water cooler moments, WhatsApp works.
Thank you. What about you, Tina? I've increasingly seen a large number of women, especially small women entrepreneurs, who have created groups on WhatsApp, especially during the pandemic, along with mentors who give them, who give them advice um, on how to, how to run their business through the pandemic. And these are women who, who don't have access to a lot of other tools, but they find WhatsApp very useful because it's easy and it's available on everyone's phone. So, what do you think about this kind of technology reaching, even small
Yeah.
entrepreneurs or small work?
That's so true. That's so true, right? Right from, saris that you want to buy
Yeah,
to art classes that get promoted on WhatsApp. I think it's just created a safe space for women to just, to just get connected, right? One of the things, like we have the Vapasi program, which is the returnee program for, women technologists on a career break. And 2020, we lost a lot of momentum because, we all went virtual, and Vapasi was a face-to-face program. And then we restarted again in November, and we went all virtual, right? And we had our challenges, of course, quite a few. But one of the things, primary concerns that we had was, how are the women going to stay connected, right? That energy of coming together and, being in a room together, we can't really recreate anyhow, but really WhatsApp groups have helped a lot. Even before the pandemic, right? Those informal conversations, the ability to share something that you find interesting, or you find funny, or, that you find relevant to the group. We've been able to do that. But the fact and the reality is, technology has its pros and cons, and that's something that we'll have to be aware of. Especially when it comes to data sets and artificial intelligence, and then biases that could be built around that. I think Gartner has done a research on that is hugely valuable in saying that we need to be very, very careful about the data sets we use, the people who are building these data sets, and the ability of their biases to be influenced, on the findings as well, is something that we need to be aware of. But yeah, as always, a huge user, like Madhurima put it, of WhatsApp, and yeah, there's a family group that we have between my daughters and my husband and me, and oh my God, that's crazy on that.
Absolutely. I think the beautiful part of WhatsApp is you don't need to be really technology savvy to be able to use WhatsApp. So even some of the uneducated, like I see one of my house helpers using WhatsApp, and she does some side business on the side, sari business that Tina said, and how it has enabled users, small, really small entrepreneurs that may not have a good education and still want to do something, passionate about something. I think WhatsApp is on tops.
absolutely. So we'll come back to our topic, diversity. What are the best ways do you think organizations can follow to promote diversity? Madhurima?
So the best way is always to set examples, lead by example. And I think that's what organizations need to do, right? Walk the talk. We've been talking enough about the importance of diversity, about why it's, important in growing an organization, but time to take action. So, get those faces out there. Let there be the role models for people to see. And I'll share, an example. Just yesterday, I was walking around with my daughter. She's just 8 years old, for the context. And after about half an hour, she says, "Mommy, there are so few girls playing here." And I'm like, so there are so many children, right? She's like, no, but there's there are hardly any girls who are running or playing. I was like, if an 8 year old is so observant and is hesitant to run around and play if she doesn't see many of her kind, imagine by the time we grow up, how ingrained in us it is to feel that, probably this place is not for me if we don't see people like us. So, which is why, give that extra push. It might feel tough for a while. The men might feel sidelined for a while. Why is there so much focus on women? But it's needed, right? To create that level where there is enough representation from both to take away these biases. So I think that's the only thing, that's a must thing that they must do. Have more women around at all levels, give them a seat at the table, and hear them out what they have to say. Not just because it's a good thing to do, but because that will create a positive impact all around.
Jayanti, what are the challenges that companies face when they formulate or implement diversity and inclusion programs? And why do some of the programs fail?
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally what I feel is diversity. I mean, I think organizations, if you have the right meritocracy in your processes, diversity will naturally happen, right? You have enough representation in the community, and if you encourage the top of funnel, which is purely merit based, diversity will naturally follow. So the challenge for me is really, how do we step out of our comfort zones and have some of those uncomfortable conversations, be willing to listen and accept our biases, and especially I think learn from the next generation. Probably our earlier generation may not have set the right precedence of having a productive workforce by only hiring and promoting maybe stereotypes, right? Like females as secretaries or typists, or you know um, physically challenged may not have been considered, etc. But we owe it to ourselves, and I think the next generation, to every day fight our own biases. So I think, one, it's about having the right conversations to find the right sponsors and allies in business, that you're integrating your D&I programs is not just a good thing to do, like I think somebody said, but as a necessary thing to do, not because it just makes business sense, but because we owe it to the ecosystem to enable a platform of equity for all and to uplift the voice of the underserved. So I think instead of finding business merits, we may not be champions of D&I. We will be running another program. So it's all about just going beyond that, and just being conscious citizens to be able to do the right thing for people, right? Because you need to be good human beings first.
Madhurama, we are in 2021 and we still in India find very few women in leadership positions. So do you think there are unconscious or conscious biases that lead to less diversity in leadership positions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts, from the very beginning. While we do say in India we have less, I also want to highlight the fact that in India we had a women prime minister way before, the rest of the world caught up. So its positives are also there, and if you look at our ancient India, the women are called devis. They get an equal stance there. But somewhere in between, we lost that. And what I think has contributed to the fact that we have less women today is there are less women, less girls who are studying, right, and are dropping off after the early years. And when the time comes to get in the workforce and to grow up, the rise up the ladder, as they, that is when the familial responsibilities fall on their shoulders, which kind of pulls them out of the organized workforce. I don't have the data, but probably Tina or Jayanti might have. But I think in the unorganized sector, we do have a lot of women who are working but are not counted as part of the workforce as such. So I think the challenge is that it's not that women are not working; they're just not working in the visible areas, which is getting measured, which is getting paid, and their contribution being acknowledged. So start right at the beginning, give them the required education, impart the skills that are required to succeed in an organized workforce, and not just do the work which is behind the scenes or silent work. And I think automatically, see, there is no doubt or no debate about the fact whether women can do something or not. They can do everything. And anybody can do everything. I believe that, as long as they've been given the right training and the opportunity and the environment to grow in. So that's where I really think we are lagging behind. Of course, societal change is never instantaneous. It is always a slow process. But the fact that we are talking about these things, it's being recognized and moving, as they say, from that state of unconscious to conscious recognition of the fact that something needs to be done about, that augurs well for India.
Which brings me to the last question of this roundtable. Tina, I'll put it to you. Going forward, what would be the best ways for organizations to promote diversity?
I think if you start from the tenet that, okay, I need to do this because my head office in the US or, wants to do this, or, that may not be the right thing to do. There is so much of a cultural context to DEI when it comes to, your individual organization, where you are from, all of that, right? So starting with a goal or a target without really understanding those nuances is a big, big problem. I think it's very, very important for people to understand and be aware of the privileges they carry, right? We all carry our own privileges, highlighting them, talking about the inequities that exist around us, and building a culture that thrives on heterogeneity is very, very important. Now, how do you do that? Right? You need to build awareness that our world is beyond, the four walls of the office, our homes, right? We live in a very, very diverse workplace. And there is inequity in the world today. And we all know that. And if we really want to sustain as just humans, I think we need to be aware and we need to build inclusive spaces. And hence, I think, building that awareness within the ecosystem of the workplace is very, very important. Whether I want to have diversity or not in my workplace and invest in it is not important because it exists and we can't say no to that, right? And acknowledging that and letting your employees be aware of that. We do something called the Banyan Tree series in ThoughtWorks, and we invite an external speaker. We talk about everything, right, from caste system to some of the inequities or some of the issues that are there that exist in the world today. And these speakers are informed speakers, and these are recommendations that come from our employees. And they come and they talk about these things, and we find ways and opportunities of contributing, of knowing more, of reading, of having these, group circles which are, pick up a book, read it, talk about it, all of that. That awareness is important. But in addition to that, you need to have a leadership that is very focused on DEI. Yes, you need to have goals, you need to have targets because that helps you stay very focused, right? But you also need to have inclusive practices, policies, you need to have affinity groups, you need to have storytelling sessions, you need to have advancement opportunities for people. So it is not one single thing that you do. It's much, much wider and a very, very large holistic effort, but it starts both from top down and bottom up. And I think that is something that we need to acknowledge. And as a DI person who's been in the DI space, I realized that my role in this is very, very small. It is a collective responsibility of the organization to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
Would Jayanti or Madhurima like to add to what Tina just said?
I think Tina summed it up beautifully. She covered the whole gamut of an organization's responsibility. I also think most importantly, it's about creating every single person in the ecosystem. How can they think about it? Forget inclusion, forget diversity, but just think wellness for the soul, mind, and the body for every single individual in the ecosystem, which means you're respecting people, you're respecting thought process, you're showing an element of care, and you're ensuring that in every interaction when you're having meetings, every voice is being heard, and having these open conversations becomes critical, right? Second, you do have to have programs and policies and structures that promote this. Just saying, okay, I have a merit-based system is not going to help it. We need to focus on these special communities. We need to talk about, how to give them the privileges that they might have missed because they are a minority. So doing all that we can. For example, at PayPal, we do women exclusive learning programs, right? Like a shadow a leader or a unity sponsorship program exclusively for women, for example. Those needs to continue. And lastly, how do we promote the right leaders and the allies who are, walking the talk and really being role models so people can emulate and just follow naturally becomes critical.
Thank you, Madhurima, Jayanti, and Tina for being part of this roundtable on tackling the unconscious biases in the workplace. Thank you so much for your thoughts and opinions. And we hope things will be better and we'll be able to tackle biases better in the times to come.